Educational Law, Michigan Indian Tuition Waiver Brochure Project. Dr. Martin Reinhardt and April Lindola from the NAS486 American Indian Educational Law and Leadership class will present the brochure they developed regarding the history of the Michigan Indian Tuition Waiver and will discuss their individual experiences as part of their service learning project. Components of the project included research, the prehistory of the Michigan Indian Tuition Waiver, the history of the Michigan Indian Tuition Waiver, developing a timeline, developing a resources and references list, and reformatting and distributing the final brochure. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Martin Reinhardt and April Lindola.
All right. Bonjour. We're down to a small crowd, but an interesting crowd, I might add.
Bonjour. I also glad to be here with all of you, and I do want to acknowledge as a guest on the Anishinaabe Traditional Homelands that it's an honor for me to be presenting this information and to have been a part of this project as a student in Martin's class. So,
just to give you a little background on the class itself, this is a class that we developed a couple years ago, Law and Leadership. We actually had American Indian Education general kind of survey class that was part of our curriculum. But we moved into a master's level program along the School of Education. And as part of that, we created this course to have more of a focus on policy and the issues surrounding policy. And so at the beginning of this class, we were looking at incorporating a service learning component. This is an online course, and so it's a bit unique as far as Indian education classes, especially at the master's level. And this is the first time that we've actually incorporated a service learning component into this class. So this is a brand new opportunity for us. So just to give you a little background on how it is that we actually come to focus on the Michigan Indian Tuition Waiver as an opportunity for a service learning project, it wasn't the original idea that we actually had for a service learning project. We were actually asked by the folks in Wisconsin if we might be interested in looking at Wisconsin Indian education policy and actually doing helping them determine what kind of public-facing documents were available on the internet regarding Indian education policy in Wisconsin. That did not actually come to fruition. But meanwhile, myself and Chairman Payment and a couple other folks had informally met online or in person to discuss the current status of the Michigan Indian Tuition Waiver. And because there seems to be this ever-approaching, issue, a crisis with the Michigan Indian Tuition Waiver, ever looming in the background, someone's always talking about how can we cut it, how can we chop it. We were discussing how can we strengthen it. And so the conversation as it rolled along, I passed that along to the students in the class. And we looked at several documents historically and contemporaneously, and we decided that this might be a good fit for our class. And so that's kind of where we took off from that point. And I'll let April tell you from a student's perspective how she and the other students may have actually been thinking about this in the beginning.
So as part of our assignment, and as actually here at the university, I am actually on the Academic Service Learning Committee, so I'm very attuned to projects throughout the campus of what's happening, and was excited to be a student in this class and actually know that it's going to have an academic service learning component. But one of the main things about academic service learning, just to kind of maybe step back just even a little bit, is to say that it's important to recognize a couple of things. One, we obviously have the expert on the topic here as the instructor, Professor Reinhardt. We have a community, sometimes it's a practitioner, somebody actually that we work with. In this case, the community practitioner wasn't a person more than it was just the community of American Indian tribes and American Indian residents within the state of Michigan. And then it's the onus on the students then is to reflect, to not only take part in the project itself and have it be implemented and come to fruition, but to reflect on that process, reflect on the understanding of how it's impactful to that community. And so that's one thing I think that's important to understand as we define academic service learning, is to understand those things. that was sort of my professional hat. Now here's my student hat. The collaborative creation was really rewarding for me because I'm obviously not the only student in the class, but because it's online, we have students who are in Ontario, students who are in Baraga, students who are throughout the Upper Peninsula, even here in Marquette, but we haven't ever met face-to-face. And so it's a really great way to be able to interact with students. We interact every other Wednesday evening, and it's a live chat situation. And so we throw out ideas and have conversations and meet professionals in the field. And Dr. Reinhardt will introduce topics that we'll discuss for that evening. As one of the first things we did was discuss, well, when do we want to have this due? And for myself, being extremely busy at the end of the semester, it was first suggested by the faculty member, Dr. Reinhardt, well, let's just have it done at the end of the semester. To which my heart was beating a little bit, and I said, why don't we have it done for an event like the powwow? What a great, it's kind of in the midterm, it will be a good midterm project to have, knowing how busy we all can get at the end of the semester, but also what a great way to introduce it to the American Indian community.
And I got to tell you, this is the first time I've ever had students in my class say, let's have it due sooner rather than later.
So, and actually, I was a little nervous because we wanted to work on is the democracy in the class, but all the students agreed to that. They kind of thought that was a good idea. That with having the Native American Student Association powwow kind of at that midterm point, that this was a great vehicle for us to do the distribution that was required of us as part of the project requirement. So one of the things, each student, you heard as our introduction went through, we had a historical timeline. We had a student who did the early history. We had a student that did the contemporary history, and then we had a student do references. My role was to take all that material, kind of edit in place, and actually come up with the graphic layout and the look of the brochure itself. And there are probably 7 to 8 drafts, and I kind of guesstimated about 35 or so hours time. It's probably a little bit more, but I feel like in a way I'm sort of the lucky one because I got to stare at the information hour after hour after hour. And I really felt that was a good way for me as I'm literally moving things around. And this is the cover. I had asked Marty, I always feel like images help enhance text, right? So Marty found the map, he knew the map. But if you weren't familiar with the trilateral relationship image, which is on the bottom, kind of in the middle there, tribal, federal, state, and the MITW in the center, that's something we've learned about in the class, about that relationship with regards to the federal trust responsibility for Indian education, the state's role and responsibility, and the tribe's roles and responsibility, and how that relationship works. This particular program, the Michigan Indian Tuition Waiver, you see is represented in the center, is a perfect example of how the trilateral relationship is so important. And Martin may want to talk about that a little bit more, but this is an image that he came up with as he's been doing his scholarship and work over the years. And so we found that it was a perfect opportunity to use it to kind of enhance our message of that relationship. One other graphic that you see that's kind of on the back is the link from the historical to the contemporary, and you'll see that kind of big fat arrow next to the Snyder Act. That was also a conversation that we had about the link. And I think because there's a lot of people who believe that it was really just something that came up after the Comstock Agreement, or there's just people who think, well, it came up in the discussion in the early 1970s, when in fact there's really proof that it is tied to this historical line. And so that particular graphic was very, very important. And the reason that there's an arrow with the Snyder Act demonstrates we want people to then, when you're looking on the inside, which I don't know if you want to change that, it really shows how things went from tribal specific. So if treaties were being made with tribes and then agreements were being made with tribes, in 1924 the Snyder Act then laws became pan-Indian. All Indian groups became inclusive for all Indian groups. So now we're familiar, of course, with the Indian Child Welfare Act, or American Indian Religious Freedom. So that change happened, that shift happened with the Snyder Act from going tribal specific to pan-Indian rulings from the feds. And so that's something that for myself, this light bulb went on. This light bulb, I'm just, oh, that's really important. And so that was something that I felt that graphically should be drawn to our attention. As you can see from the inside, there is a lot of text. It was really, really hard to not include some things that the other students did research on and wrote upon. But there's a lot of text, but we felt that we were trying to share as much information in a convenient package, if you will, that would be as educational as possible. So we feel that this brochure could be distributed to, obviously, American Indian families, prospective students, but even state legislatures who really do need to have that kind of education done because they're making decisions based on these things and based on whether it be budget or allocations or other things. And so we really felt that we wanted the brochure to meet many people's needs. So yeah, I guess that's why there's a lot of information on the inside. But it was something for me to be able to go through and read other students' work. And we all have access to everybody's stuff on our online forum that we have. So it really kind of pick and choose. And that was probably pretty challenging for me to be able to say, this is important, this is not. And I, also because I get to see and work with Marty on a regular basis, we had lots of discussions. And because I kept saying, people who don't know, do they really have to know this quote? And so we had lots of those kind of conversations to strategize to make sure what was in the brochure was necessary for the brochure.
Just to give you an idea about the enormity of just the pre-legislative history of the tuition waiver, my master's thesis at Central focused on that, and it was over 200 pages. And all of that's pertinent information that people really need to understand. So trying to get that down to front and the back, cover, that's really difficult. And if for those of you who know me, I'm a guy that can go on and on and on and on talking about something, so it's really hard for me to encapsulate my thoughts. So,
I think for myself with the learning process, one of the things in my own reflection as part of the assignment was that even though I've been an advocate for American Indian students for over 20 years now as a professional at NMU, I was slightly embarrassed that I did not know all of the specifics of what we put together in this brochure. And kind of my own demonstration, my own litmus test of knowing and realizing that this is sticking with me. My husband, who's a radio news network guy who actually does converse and has the opportunity once in a while to talk with state legislators, he's kind of asked me, he goes, their briefs are just that, they're briefs. Why would they read this? And I said, well, even having an opportunity to talk to some people, and I was able to explain, I'm in a car, so obviously I'm not reading this. I'm driving along, and we're having this conversation, and I'm able to rattle off years. A few months ago, I would have never had that. So I really realized that this was a wonderful opportunity for me that enhances my skill as an advocate for students here in this university and elsewhere throughout the state. And I've actually headed friend of mine who's down in the Ypsilanti area is going to Washtenaw Community College, has had questions, and there's a little bit of a frustration going on there with her financial aid office. And I said, as soon as this is printed off and approved with all the thumbs up from across the board, I will send you a copy. And that's what I did. And so she was very, very grateful to be able to receive that. And she's going to work with her financial aid office, utilizing this brochure as an informational source, as to make her case and what's going on with her situation at her community college. So I know that it's already being put to practice and to good use.
So did you send it to the legislature yet?
we have not.
Okay.
No, that's still part of what we need to accomplish is before the end of the semester, we need to get a distribution plan together and get it out to folks. It is going to be posted at the Center for Native American Studies website as a home for it. And we'll also have at that website then the resources and references listed. So that'll be two things that we still have to accomplish for the project this semester.
Yeah, and that is one thing that I will say that was a finding, is because there's so much text and so much information, we couldn't fit the resources in this particular brochure. So we direct individuals to visit our website for those resources. And it's my understanding the student who was responsible for that I just uploaded to the forum recently, and so hopefully that is near completion where it can be shared on our website.
You know what would really be helpful is, so there's a group of us that are strategizing right now to push for full funding, the tuition waiver, and I think we have a really good chance at it this year.
Good.
Before Senator Walker retires. But
Absolutely.
are connected with it.
Yeah.
Actually, Carol and I go back
Yes.
30 years with being a watchdog group on the waiver.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and April,
this
and
is coming on.
there's a whole June Fletcher, there's a
Yeah,
whole bunch of people.
absolutely.
But if
So
can
we
get it out-
did do the mailing already for tribes, and I believe tribal educators, education directors were included as part of that mailing, and that was very recent, within the last week and a half. So
Maybe
it's my
what I-
understanding it's in their, at least in their hands.
What I would recommend is I think that there is another United Tribes meeting happening.
Oh, great.
Okay, great.
It'll be in August though.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay.
Okay.
Is it in August? No, that's Potawatomi. I think it's in June, yeah. And
Oh,
that-
okay, great.
And if we could ask I don't know who the officers are for the education directors, for them to host a session at United Tribes.
Yeah.
That you guys could present
Yep.
and get everybody on board.
Love
so
to.
they all understand it. Because you're right, too many people don't, even tribal leaders don't understand the basis for it.
Yeah.
You know, we know it's a legislative solution to a treaty right, but some don't have any idea how strongly
That's
it
right.
is,
Yeah.
in the guise of a treaty.
Yep.
Mhm.
So equipping them so we can all speak.
The same message,
Right.
yeah. Having the same message and being able to articulate that. That's what I found for myself. This was so helpful for me.
Mailing it to the education directors too, there's a disconnect between them and the elected leaders.
Yeah.
So doing it all at the same, or if you mail it to the tribal leaders, then it doesn't completely get to the
Mailing
education.
it to all the financial aid officers on the colleges, all the presidents of the colleges.
That's a great idea too.
Everything.
Yes,
you
yep,
know,
yep.
And the governance office at the college,
Mhm.
that's where you need to go
Yeah.
to.
Yeah,
Well, we could probably invite Michael Bolus
Mhm.
to the education director. If the education directors host the meeting in conjunction with the United Tribes, we could invite Michael Bolus to come.
Okay.
And if it's all of us requesting it, then he's the lobbyist for the universities, and he's the one that has been helped us to fix this over the years.
Great.
But he isn't an active person, like he'll step back if a college starts going forward with satisfactory progress and all of that, so.
Okay. Well, I will tell you this. We have developed this based on the stuff that's available in the written history, and so all of it is documented. Now, of course, it does come down to interpretation, and based on our interpretation, mine especially, I do believe that there are significant links to our treaty rights and to the trust obligation in general. And I think that's where sometimes people get confused, because treaty rights and trust obligation seem like two different things to folks. But the trust obligation is really rooted in treaty rights. And so a lot of people get that confused. So when we're talking about specific Michigan treaties and Anishinaabe Bay treaties, they think, well, gee, if we just focus on treaties, then all of these non-Anishinaabe tribes are going to be in the cold, they're going to be out. And that's not the case. It's really based on two things: the treaties that are specific to Michigan and the trust responsibility in general. And you see that when we switch between the federal and the state obligations. When the federal government hands this obligation over to the state of Michigan, essentially the state of Michigan becomes a federal agency. They're acting on behalf of the federal government to make this happen. And so when they invoke, when we invoke our treaty rights, we do so through the Comstock Agreement into state education. And a lot of people don't get that link. And it's a very important link then. And that's why the Michigan Indian Tuition Waivers truly is rooted in the middle of those three sovereigns. Starting off in the chronology of tribal control of our education, and then the subsequent treaty obligations that the federal government has. 26 treaties with the Anishinaabe contain educational provisions. 16 specific to Michigan. And then when they transfer that obligation over to the state of Michigan does nothing for almost 40 years until the Michigan Indian Tuition Waiver. And that's all documented in this brochure. You can actually see the chronology, and even from a federal perspective. We were just talking with Bill Mendoza, who's here on our campus today, going to be meeting with you guys in a short time, and we were talking about this with him. And he truly understands that the federal government is obligated, but that the state of Michigan has this unique obligation among the states. he gets it. You know, I think our president at our university gets it. And there's not a lot of people in those kind of positions who really get it. But I think we're moving forward. We're, you know, making some progress. And I think with your help, dealing with tribal elected officials and administrators, I think we can actually at least try to get us all on the same page. And that's going to be a very big accomplishment, especially if what we think may be happening is actually happening, and that there may be a lawsuit coming forward about the Michigan Indian tuition waiver, which could have major repercussions on the tuition waiver itself. We may be in court sooner than we think dealing with this. And unfortunately, that's going to mean that people who are experts on it will have to go testify, and tribal elected officials, because you guys are going to carry the weight. Your perspective is going to be truly, you know, the thing that may be the deciding factor in if this lives or dies. So, just to mention a few other things about this. I don't know if you can actually. It's hard to see on the screen there, but on our brochure, if you want to go ahead and pass some of those out, April. On the brochure, you can see that it's actually kind of a funnel. And the reason why we use a funnel shape is because what we're doing essentially in the history of the tuition waiver is at the top of the funnel, the federal government has all of this treaty obligation. You know, they've made treaties with all of the different tribes in the United States, and they're dealing with each tribe separately. And that's an important idea for folks to realize, that the federal government back in the 1800s are going through this crazy time. They almost got bankrupt based on American Indian treaties. Literally, the U.S. government almost went bankrupt. And so because of that, by 1921, they came to this idea that in order to save money, they were going to funnel all of these treaty obligations into this Omnibus Indian Appropriations Bill, the Snyder Act. And from there forward, they were going to limit the amount of obligation that they were actually authorizing and appropriating in the federal budget. So you think about the idea, you know, they shortchanged our tribes to save the federal government budget. Now that's common. You know, look what they did with Cobell litigation, right? They realized that they owed billions, and what did they do? They made a ruling that they were only going to pay a couple billion. That's not uncommon for the federal government to do this. So that's an important piece of that, is we see that this obligation is being funneled down to one federal act, appropriations bill. And then from there forward, up to the contemporary status, it starts to mushroom out again. So you start to see all of these different acts now, these federal acts for Indian education come to be. And so it becomes very confusing. You know, the big differences, like April was saying earlier, is that it used to be tribal specific. They were dealing with truly a government-to-government relationship. But from 1921 forward, they started dealing with pan-Indian education as their preferred method. And that really confuses people because it doesn't take into consideration. Of course, we still have the BIE, the BIA that deals with tribal schools, tribal colleges, but then we have things like the Title VII Indian Education, and we have JOM, and we have Impact Aid, and we have all these different programs that are being, all this money is being funneled into the title programs, and people are saying, well, that's for Indian Ed in general. But they fail to realize that the history of those programs truly is rooted in the Treaty of Responsibility. So that's really an important idea to get across to folks. Otherwise, they look at the Michigan Indian Tuition Waiver as feel-good legislation. Oh, you know, these legislators woke up one day and felt sorry for Indians, and so they decided that, geez, we need more Indians in college. Let's pass an Indian Tuition Waiver Act. And that is not the way it happened, but, you know, you ask most people, that's what they think. The other set of folks that I think it's really important that we as tribal leaders, educational leaders, that we reach them are tribal attorneys. And you guys know this more than anyone because of who you deal with on a daily basis. If we have our own tribal attorneys who don't understand this history and they're out dealing with the circles that they run in, talking to other attorneys, and they're telling them that no, it's not treaty-based or it's not based on the trust responsibility, then these are people who influence judges. These are the people who may be fighting in court on our behalf.
So we need Indian attorneys.
That's right. So, you know, we need to convince our own attorneys that, they don't need to be out there speaking against what we believe to be true, because it really comes down to interpretation and belief. I think our strongest argument is that, yes, this is treaty-based, and it's based on a trust relationship, and that it needs to be defended at all costs. This is ultimately a federal responsibility that's been handed down to the state. Tribes need to stand up for it and defend it.
Yeah, it was commented, Carol mentioned that we need more Indian attorneys, but we also need more attorneys studying Indian law.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the combination of those two things that will strengthen our stance, because we as educators are not necessarily the ones that are going to be in the courtroom. And so whatever we can do to help that and help that message obviously is extremely important. And we're, again, I'm very grateful to have been a part of this project, but we do. And I think ultimately it's a combination of utilizing this, but also understanding that Indian law itself is complex and important and worthy of its own discipline and degree to be studied. So.
Just to reinforce that idea about tribal attorneys, or attorneys in general, and their understanding, in 1972, Paul Johnson and the Great Lakes Indian Youth Alliance filed a lawsuit against the University of Michigan based on this idea. And why did we lose that case? Do you remember why we lost that case?
Because they didn't know the treaties.
Because the attorneys never once mentioned the canons of treaty construction. In that case, I mean, imagine that, folks. That never once mentioned it. That's because they had non-Indian attorneys with knowing non-Indian law, never mentioned canons of treaty construction at all. And we lost it because the judge ultimately ruled that the gift of land was to the church, not to the federal government. And the last time I checked, treaties were made between tribes and the U.S. government, the federal government, not the church. So, to have attorneys not even seize on that and argue the canons of treaty construction and the government-to-government relationship, we lost that because they don't understand Indian law. So we can't let that happen again. We got to get out there and educate. And believe me, we have some hotheads in our communities right now who are out there shooting their mouth off about the tuition waiver, and that's probably what's causing the big uproar right now. And we have a lot of educating to do in a very short amount of time. So it's important that we get people like Bill Mendoza, get him this stuff, and make sure his mind is in our corner, and others that we are all educated and being able to say, well, you know what, in 1934, this is exactly what happened. In 1955, this is what happened, and so on and so forth. Give them the facts. That way no one's out there saying the wrong information. We don't want to be arguing against ourselves. So, I guess the other thing is, I just wanted to point out the map. This is, obviously, you guys have seen this before. This is the original Michigan treaty map that was entered into the books. What's that? Yes. So, as you can see, it has the treaty-ceded areas. Now, oftentimes, if tribal leaders and legislators and other folks involved in public policy, if they're familiar with treaties at all, this is what they're familiar with. The idea of the treaty-ceded lands, the territories. And certainly these are important, but these are only a portion of the treaties that actually impacted Indian education in Michigan. So you actually have a group of 26 treaties. Now the Anishinaabe tribes in general, I think we had like 73 different treaties that we were either together or separately involved with the United States federal government. The Ojibwe were involved in 42 of those. Now the Ojibwe treaties, that as a set, are really important, because when we're talking about Ojibwe as compared to Potawatomi and Odawa, if you look at the way the treaties were written, the Ojibwe were representing the Anishinaabe in some. So Ojibwe treaties are really important for that. When they were written, they included Potawatomi and Odawa, even if they weren't mentioned, because of our understanding of our own identity at that time. The Ojibwe did speak for the Anishinaabe. And so Ottawa and Potawatomi are actually included in Ojibwe treaties. A lot of people don't get that. They don't get the ambiguity of identity that's involved in our treaties. And a good lawyer would be able to argue that. And so when we're talking about the enormity of the treaties, 42 of those involve the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy. 26 of those have educational provisions. And there's not 26 treaties mentioned here. So we got to remind them it's much broader than just a treaty ceded territory map, even though that's what they're familiar with, and they see that, they get that. They get the exchange of land for other exchange items like education. So we do want to remind them that yes, it is rooted in the land, but it's broader than the treaties that are usually the ones that are looked at. And it's also important to remind, especially the non-Indian educator, the legislators, that it's not just Indian people that exercise treaty rights. And this is something that I always tell my classes. You know, the very fact that Northern Michigan University exists as a state institution, I say state in quotes because they only get like 30%
Yes.
funding from the state now.
Yes, 31%.
So, I mean, but it does exist as a state public institution. The very fact that it can exist is based on the state of Michigan being able to be a state of Michigan. If it were not for the land, there would be no state of Michigan. Therefore, this idea of public education is itself a treaty right. So people kind of don't connect those, but it's important that we remind them of that.
A lot of people don't understand that the 1836 treaty was critical because to become a state, to move from a territory to a state, did have a continuous land mass
Yeah,
and economic,
here to here.
and that treaty connected the two peninsulas, and so otherwise the UP would have been in Wisconsin, and we became a state, and then Michigan became a state less than a year after the signing of the 1836 treaty. And that's
Right.
a big thing, and I was just, two or three days ago, I was just at Tuskegee, and they were traditionally black college. They were the first land grant black college, and the land grant universities received their land as a grant from the federal government immediately after the land was ceded from the tribes in the treaties.
Yeah.
And it was just for the federal government to do the first stimulus package to create the agricultural development. So most campuses that are land grant colleges, Michigan State, U of M, Tuskegee, was on the backs of our property, on our
Yeah.
land.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and that's something actually we were just talking about yesterday when we were meeting with the president. And he was talking about the idea of, you know, where the land grants come from and what their intended uses are. And Bill's very interested in how the relationship between the historical black colleges or the Latino serving institutions, and we're going to be talking about that probably later today. But you know, one of the questions that Bill asked is, you know, which of the colleges and universities are the native serving institutions,
Yeah.
right? Not just tribal colleges, because we know that. Which ones are the native serving institutions, like the historical black colleges? And so they have this list of 98
Yeah.
98 institutions they've identified,
That's right now.
and we want to be one of them, Northern
I'm
Michigan.
sure you are, I mean, I'm sure Lake State and, U of M and probably Minnesota has a few.
Yeah, I think Minnesota's in the list right now.
Yeah, yeah. We actually currently don't qualify.
Oh, we
We
don't?
were very, very close here at NMU, very close. But how they're looking at the wording, and again, some of the specifics, I'm not real savvy with all those specific numbers, but they're looking at, because when I was aware of it, it was 10% of the overall population, but that is now changing to an average of 300 students over 3 years.
3-year period.
And so that is the number we were actually much closer to. So I think that it is within our reach. So
Well,
that would be very,
that's-
very nice if we could call ourselves that.
And that's the idea that we're trying to propose, is that we could probably hit that number for a 3-year period if we did a consortium.
Right.
So whatever group falls under this consortium could be that.
You know, one other idea is before you print these, did you mass print them or?
We're printing them all the time.
Okay, so so when you get ready to do the legislative print run, I would consider including the quote from, I know you said there's lots of quotes to include, but I would consider including the Milliken quote. Because,
I think it's in there.
okay.
Yeah.
No, not that one. The quote that's in my PowerPoint is that the state recognizes that it may not have fulfilled its
Yes,
obligations.
that was one that I think we didn't have it in there. Because
No, it's in there.
Is it? Okay, good.
Governor
No,
William
it's not there.
Milliken commented the legislature has taken a positive action to
Yeah,
provide
it's not
North
there.
American Indians with a mechanism to increase their ability to achieve access to college education. It provides a segment of our society with an opportunity that recognizes that the state might not have fulfilled its obligation in the past to our North American
Oh, it
Indians.
is there.
Detroit News, yep.
So, just
And-
the way that legislators see things, that deserves to be highlighted somehow.
Okay.
And I don't know if you can put it
In yellow or something,
maybe right under the university return address.
or else maybe.
A
Have you
quote.
seen those ones that, the handouts are like, they come, like for tribal self-governance or health, they fold out, they're little and then they fold out? That might be a
I'm
way
not
to.
sure.
This is perfect. I'm just saying that.
No, I think I know. Actually, what I was actually thinking is maybe the front page to further demonstrate the trilateral. That maybe I could make these a little bit smaller and put the governor's quote in there,
Maybe across the bottom.
or on the bottom. Yeah,
And then the reason why.
that's got to stand out.
psychologically, Because that governor has respect on both sides of the aisle. He's
Yeah.
still alive,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he still supports the tuition waiver. And it's the highest official of the state recognizing the
that's right.
responsibility.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And again, in Michigan right now, we have a House and Senate and the governorship all controlled by the Republican Party.
Yep.
And he's a Republican.
yeah,
So I think that
That's a good
really
point.
is
It's a good
impactful.
idea.
yeah. Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, we'll make that change.
Good tactical addition.
It's beautiful. Your students are to be commended.
Well, miigwech, I think they did a fantastic job.
You know, those of us who have been fighting this fight for, which includes April, for, almost 30 years now, is, we scramble around with our big binders and documents, and it's like, they aren't gonna read through all of that.
No.
Right.
This is perfect because it's succinct, it tells them, it's consolidated, and then the part about the references part, they can go to that because you cite that part,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
This is exactly what is needed, and when we get ready to deploy it after the mailing, I would be willing, if Carol will join me and we can get other tribal leaders to go and hit legislative offices in the state
Excellent.
and educate them and make sure they understand this.
Well,
That's great.
Yeah, kudos to you guys for being willing to do that, because that really, this is, again, we're a vehicle to your community and making this kind of thing, and if you're willing to carry that on, what a ripple effect of positive, very positive, yeah. I'm speechless. That'd be
Well,
awesome.
just to give you some follow-up to the project, we had originally hoped that once the students had this completed, we were going to send it off to the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, who of course now administers the Michigan Indian Tuition Waiver, and we did so. And we contacted them and spoke with Matt Weesaw, and unfortunately, because there is a stirring of a lawsuit regarding the tuition waiver, Matt Weesaw said that when he joins us for our live chat next week on Wednesday evening, that he's unable to speak to the Michigan Indian Tuition Waiver as an issue, which is very unfortunate because now we're short-circuited on talking about this with the official who's in charge of representing this at the state level.
He has to listen.
That's true. That is true.
And that's not a problem, because Matt has been an advocate forever, and
Yeah.
it's the people who, and this is very different than what's happening. There are people
It is.
who want to litigate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They want to litigate the blood quantum issue, which none of us feel good about,
No.
but it is what it is, for now.
Sure.
And my big goal is to push the full funding, and I've been collapsed into that group of people, those advocates that are trying to get the blood quantum eliminated. I believe in getting the blood quantum eliminated, but not all the tribes do. And the thing is, we have to be on the same page on that issue before we're willing to fight that issue.
Yeah, I
So
think
I'm
so.
going to defer to the other tribal leaders until we figure out our position on that issue, and we're not there yet.
Sure.
But I think we are all in agreement with full funding.
Yeah.
And United Tribes just passed a resolution in calling for full funding, and we're focusing it as a university issue, not a tribal issue.
Yeah.
Because when the colleges have been, Northern, Lake State have been phenomenally underfunded for several years, each eating several $1 million in waived tuition that they haven't been reimbursed. And I was talking to Pinawanok just a few minutes ago, and what I've seen since the tuition waiver was collapsed in the base budget is a reduction reduction of programming and a reduction of commitment at universities.
Yeah.
Because all this that they do doesn't necessarily bring native students that have a tuition waiver.
Yep.
And once we get full funding, I think it's going to benefit the universities because then they can get back in the competition race again to see who's got the better program. And that's good. I'd like to see them compete.
Yeah.
To see who's got the better program.
Well, and you bring up a good point, the disincentivization of bringing in tuition waiver eligible students to a university. Now, you may have universities who are really committed to the idea, but in reality, they have no incentive to go out and get more tuition waiver eligible students based on simply the tuition dollars. You know, to them, it's just going to be a drain. So, unless they're actually committed to building up the diversity, the commitment to the government-to-government relationship, you know, to doing what's right, you know, if it's completely a financial equation, there's no incentive at all.
So from a tribal leader perspective, I like when they have those altruistic motivations.
Yeah.
But as an administrator, I know that you have to balance a budget.
Sure.
So if we can be helpful to get full funding to the colleges so that they then have an incentive to go out and recruit native students, that's a win-win.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And there's so many, like, descendants that don't qualify as tribal members
Mm-hmm.
that graduate, that they're missing.
Yeah.
You know, they could,
Well, and
they could be getting that out too, that, you know.
yep.
Well, I did. I'll tell you, I went to the
there's
Michigan
so many
Indian.
that go as descendants and they're not, they miss it because they're not, you know, like one.
I attended the Michigan Indian Education Council conference a couple of weeks ago, and Frank Idowagijic was there. And now Frank was quite frank
He's awesome.
about the issues.
Frank was frank.
You know, we had an interesting discussion about, you know, the possibility of the lawsuit becoming a reality. And he said, you know, it's the worst thing that could ever happen. You know, he said why it's the worst thing is because, one, people don't know what they're talking about. So hopefully this helps in that area. He said the other thing is that people just aren't prepared. You know, it's catching people by surprise. We don't have a preparation period. So hopefully we can forestall that long enough to get people educated and to have maybe possibility of a legislative remedy versus a court case.
Work the case.
There's, so I was at a meeting with the people who are pushing it, and I went for the purpose to say, now hold on now, because you realize if you push this and we lose, then we lose everything that we have.
Yeah.
And are you willing to put their education on the line like that? I'm not. You know, and I'm the first to fight our treaty rights, but it's got to be done smart.
Right.
And, you know, for my tribe, we're lineal descent. So I would say 60% of the members of my tribe that could get the tuition waiver if we on citizenship,
Mm-hmm.
purely on citizenship,
Yep.
that would benefit my tribe. You know, it would be huge, it would be a big benefit. But I have to respect the fact that several years ago, education directors got together and they talked about this. And they said, not yet. And so the thing is, they're not ready to fight that yet,
Right.
come together. And the thing is, individual tribes have their blood quantum issues, they have their per capita issues, they have all of that. And the thing is, you know, I respect them and their sovereignty enough to say I don't want to push them in a direction that they're not comfortable with. I think we have to be unified on this.
Yes, we do.
And if we're not unified, then we will lose what we have. We have to be smart, and I'm getting some pushback from some of my own members and some, you know, people that are good friends of mine that have supported tuition waiver for years because they think now's the time to push it. And I would rather get full funding first and then educate the people who need to understand this completely. Because I think when we circulate through the legislature with this, first of all, my experience has been once they, even the most conservative Republican, once they understand this, they're inclined to support it.
Yeah.
And so, but why go half-cocked?
Sure.
Because if there's a threat for litigation and they don't understand it, you know what the solution to them is going to be?
Get it out.
Kill it. Yep.
And the thing is, I'm not willing to interrupt the education of young Native people who are, or even returning, not so young Native people, who, actually, I'm one of those.
Yep.
I still have a couple more credits to get, so I have to carry one credit per semester till I graduate.
Well, and that's the thing, we may not be able to deal with some of the issues surrounding the tuition waiver and the changes that have occurred since its inception. But at the very least, I think through this project and maybe some other efforts that are going on in the communities, whether it's working with other tribes through the intertribal groups, or even talking with some of the tribal citizens who are trying to push it forward and trying to forestall their lawsuits, I think we may be able to strengthen it and move it into the future so that future generations, maybe we get to resolve these other issues, like the blood quantum or whatever it is, or how maybe degree granting status and satisfactory academic progress are being integrated at some universities but not others. Those are things that we do need to iron out, but we're not going to resolve them all at once. And so I think it's important how we move forward, and I think education is the number one. Let's get people educated about what this program really represents.
So the final thing I'll say from the travel waiver perspective is this is a great service. And so it fits the Limerick Service Project perfectly because
Miigwech.
it will have an ongoing and impactful benefit to educate people about the basis for waiver.
That's great. Could I get a letter to that effect for my tenure and promotion packet?
That's a two-way street. Jamie Greenwich. Just remember, it's two-way street.
Yep. All right. Any other questions, comments? Well, I do want to point out we got a couple of folks in here who are currently using the tuition waiver, who this is really very important too. Our student coordinator for this conference, he's here on the tuition waiver. He would not be here today coordinating this were it not for this program. He said so himself. Yeah.
Yep.
Long-term student worker in our Center for Native American Studies, Amanda, a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians. She, people like her, people like Larry, myself. Oh, you're not tuition waiver. Okay. But I know a lot of us in here, we've used this to get here. I was telling April, the tuition waiver, KCP Fellowship, American Indian Leadership Fellowship. That's why I'm here today. And all those are based on my background as American Indian, my citizenship. So.
And I have an interesting perspective as with July of 2010, the decision being made to protect the waiver because of Prop 2, I no longer receive the waiver.
Yeah.
So with my status as First Nations.
That's probably actionable because it's not in the boilerplate language. And it was something that the tribal education directors met about, talked about,
Yeah.
and conceded to.
Yeah, and so we know of state historic tribal members who have left and not able to finish, being very close, watching these students have to leave was very heartbreaking.
One student within one semester of graduating with a teacher certification not able to complete. That's a travesty for an Indian student. And I mean, look at the national pressure to get Indian teachers. And what do? We
Can't find any other funding to keep them? I mean.
And we probably could have, but at that point the student was so disillusioned, he was like, I'm done.
Yeah,
It's too bad.
well, one of the other things that's not being talked about is to limit it to Michigan, descendants of Michigan tribes.
Right.
So taking it a step further.
Right,
you
right.
would exclude anybody, actually, you'd be excluded.
Yeah.
You'd be excluded.
Yep.
So, yeah, and I didn't support what they did in 2010. I was not in office in 2010 because I fought that.
Yeah.
And I don't support limiting the downside. I do support fully implementing it. Remember when the waiver was passed in '76? Actually, it was a half blood then.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Switched to
Yeah.
quarter blood in '78.
Yeah.
And at the time, the federal government practiced the quarter blood, which originates from the Severalty Act, which was designed to fractionate us, separate us from our governments.
Divide and conquer.
And then undercount us. And so why would we knowingly continue to honor such a racist practice?
Especially when the federal government doesn't anymore.
Right. In 1987, Czar versus Barlow was actually in this region where the IHS was sued, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, Czar versus Barlow, and the practice of that was made illegal.
Yeah.
So the IHS cannot limit access to IHS based on blood quantum.
Yeah.
So we we still, in the state and the tuition waiver, still use that previous practice. But having said all of that, if we challenge that, all the legislature has to do, especially if they're not informed about it, is to just eliminate it. We gotta be careful about that.
That hasn't deterred me. Obviously, I'm still in school, so, yeah, but I think.
Some of us have been in school for,
Yours is,
before you were born.
yes, for real.
We went to school together, actually.
That's right, yep.
Yeah, all my elders.
I'm not gonna say. Hey, no, it's not that much older.
Marty's 10 days younger than me, so I'm his
I'm
elder.
a couple years old.
You are a couple
Got a
years.
couple years on us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
Couple gray hairs on us.
He said it, not me.
Oh, I'm getting there.
Yeah, this is being recorded.
April and I were the NASO president and vice president.
Oh,
I don't know, is this still called NASO?
NASA.
NASA.
NASA? Oh, that sounds better.
Larry's the current vice president, and Amanda's the former president.
Yeah. Back when we were kitty corner from the Wildcat Den.
Yes, the cool Wildcat Den,
Yeah.
the one downstairs.
Well, I sure appreciate you all joining us for this session, and your comments are invaluable. And I hope this has really good impact. And I'm very proud of the class for what they've produced. It's very professional. So, big wet. And take as many copies as you would like to distribute.
Yeah. Yes, do take a bunch. We are ever printing more copies, so